Hi, I'm Paula from Team Kind, and I'm utterly delighted to be joined by the three dads walking. So pleased to introduce Mike, Beth's dad, Andy, Sophie's dad, and Tim, Emily's dad. I'm really humbled to meet you and thrilled you could join us at KindFest this year. For those who don't know the work that you do, I wondered if you could give us a bit of an introduction to yourselves, to your purpose, and to your walks.
Well, I suppose we start with me. We all got involved in this, not by choice, but because our daughters took their own lives. In our case, Soph was 29, nurse living up in Edinburgh, and she split up with her husband in back end of 2018. About her being happy, actually, not suicidal, but out of the blue, she took her own life just before Christmas 2018, so just coming up to 5 years ago. And we were shattered. Your world falls apart. It's just horrible. But off the back of losing Soph, we wanted to find a suicide prevention charity to support at her funeral, and her friend introduced us to PAPYRUS, Prevention of Young Suicide, which we'd never heard of. But it was through them we discovered that suicide's the biggest killer of under 35s in the UK. So we supported PAPYRUS at Soph's funeral. And off the back of that, I just couldn't let it go, because I thought if suicide's the biggest killer of young people, we've got to do something about it. So I did a lot of fundraising for a couple of years before I came across these two a couple of years later, should we say. So yeah. Probably so over to you two.
Yeah, so I was the next with Em. She was 19 when she took her life. This was in March 2020 at the start of the lockdown. Beautiful young girl, life and soul of the party. She struggled with life sometimes. She'd been diagnosed with high functioning autism when she was 15, which had kind of helped her deal with some of her emotions, but she'd rebuilt her life from quite a difficult period in her life. And all those kind of coping mechanisms were taken away from her at the start of the pandemic. And she just couldn't cope, and she took her own life, which, like Andy just said, absolutely threw us into a world that we were just horrendous, absolutely horrendous. Key point is that at the time, we didn't know about PAPYRUS. We'd never heard of PAPYRUS. It was nothing that was, who knew there was such a thing as a suicide prevention charity. And it was only in the kind of weeks afterwards that I kind of met Mike. And Mike, I don't know if you want to kind of carry on from there.
Yes, yeah. Just about 5 days after Tim lost Emily, we lost Beth. Beth took her own life. Beth was only 17, life and soul of the party, trained to be a vocal artist, lots of friends, huge social life. Whether she was going through a period of poor mental health, I suspect maybe she was, but very much hidden with teenage behavior. She had a razor sharp wit. She belonged on stage. She's the last person in the world you'd ever think would take her own life, make that decision. And as Andy and Tim have already said, our lives were, shattered too small a word. The whole world changed colour. And I think it's quite amazing now to think it's about 3.5 years now since we lost Beth. But the fact is that grief does change. It will never, ever be filled. She wasn't just my daughter. She was, she was a cousin. She was a niece. She was a friend. It affected so many people. But that's basically Beth's story. But I think this illustrates all our stories here. All our girls' stories were different, but they were all beautiful and loved, and they should be here now. And if things have been slightly different, that may be the case.
Yeah, I've read your beautiful testimonials to your daughters on the PAPYRUS website, and and watched you give other interviews. And it strikes me that there's two bits that strike me: just always the shock, and that you think you're connected with where your children are at the moment. I think that that statistic, the biggest killer of those under 35, is just something we need to be talking about so much more, isn't it? Why do you think that isn't better known? And, you know, what else can we do beyond the incredible work that you're doing, but what else can we do to connect?
She's frozen.
Oh, you froze. You froze, Paula.
You froze slightly then, Paula. Yeah.
After why don't you think it's better known?
Yeah. Am I back in there? See, this is when you're close to Norfolk.
Normal in Norfolk. Normal for Norfolk.
Yeah.
Let's see how we go. I guess what I was saying is, what can we do more as a community to help to raise the profile? You're doing amazing work. What else can others do? I certainly know, working in higher education or working in education full stop, it's been a really difficult topic to get high on people's agendas. We know there's a new curriculum, isn't there, for relationships, sex and health that's coming out. But what can we do to raise the profile and to promote the really good work that yourself and others are doing in this space? Ultimately, that's what's going to help to change the picture, isn't it?
I think the first thing that we've got to do as a society is accept the risk is there, is face up to the risk. Because at the moment we didn't. And when we had the debate in Parliament, we obviously had a petition that ran 160,000 signatures. And it was really interesting to see all the MPs from different sides of the House quote the Office of National Statistics figures at each other, which absolutely, there's the evidence that suicide is the biggest killer of under 35s in the UK. And once we as a society accept that it is the biggest killer of under 35s in the UK, then we can start to address that risk. But until we accept that, then we'll just keep brushing it under the carpet. And it was, as we've all said, I know when Mike first engaged with PAPYRUS after I'd met him, and he told me about it, and I was just gobsmacked, absolutely gobsmacked that, there was this risk out there, and I was on a course with Mind, and they highlighted the Samaritans report, I think it was 2017, that said there was 6,000 suicides a year. That's just suicides. Those aren't the people that, have a verdict of death by misadventure or something like that. That's 4 times the number of people that die on our roads every year. And how much effort do we put into road safety? Quite rightly so, we should be putting the effort into road safety, but we're not putting an equal amount of effort into suicide and suicide prevention.
And looking backwards, of course, suicides carried such a huge taboo. There's this massive stigma around it. Suicide, before we lost Sophie, suicide was something that was very sad, and it happened to other people, families, and in thinking back, it's interesting to realize how many people that I knew prior to Sophie who'd taken their own lives. But it was just sad, and it was an issue that happened to other people until it explodes in your family. And that, as Mike said, it changes everything. And it does. We've talked to so many suicide-bereaved parents since we've been down this route, and your lives are changed beyond recognition. After the suicide of your loved one, you're living in a completely different world than the one you lived in prior to that. But we've accidentally become quite vocal and high profile. A lot of it to do with the BBC and the guys at BBC Breakfast getting behind what we were doing. But it was that process of just being open and talking about our loss and our pain. It allowed us to talk about this biggest risk to our young people, biggest killer of under 35s, around about school-age children each year take their own lives. Actually, that, which is a huge understatement, because we met so many suicide-bereaved parents of teenagers who, without any shadow of doubt, took their own lives, but went down as accidental death or misadventure or a narrative verdict, like Beth. Beth didn't go down as a suicide. So it's a huge understatement. And that idea that, it's, I suppose the taboo stuff hangs over from when suicide was illegal, hence committing suicide, which one of the learning things that we put people right on every time. Any time anyone says commit, it's like, hang on a minute, nobody commits. You don't commit cancer, or you don't commit a heart attack, so you don't commit suicide. It's that changing of attitude, but the only way we do it is by talking about it.
Yeah. And by accepting, as you say, accepting that suicide is the biggest killer of under 35s, we lose around 200 school children a year. So we must go back to the beginning here. We must realise, we must get over the fact that if you say suicide, it'll happen. You know, the research says it doesn't, but you need to be able to talk about it to prevent it. So, you know, going back to schools, you know, our belief is really things should start early years. You know, start talking about emotions and start building those bricks, that foundation to build a resilience as you go on. You know, start, you know, encouraging help-seeking behaviour and allowing our children to realise that they can reach out. And obviously, where you introduce suicide prevention as a subject, you know, that's to be debated. But if you've built the foundations there, you know, there's many reasons for suicide, whether it's short-term despair, whether it's long-term mental health issues, but no matter what it is, if you've built that resilience, if you've educated people, you know, they'll look after themselves, they'll look after others, their families, their, you know, their friends, and yeah.
In that moment of despair as well, the only person that can help that person with suicidal thoughts can be themselves. 75% of suicides, you know, they're not known to mental health services. So that those people have kind of hidden it, or they've just had an absolute moment of despair where they want to take their own lives. And our whole point is, as Mike said, if we educate them on how to deal with those massive downtimes in their lives, which can overwhelm you in a split second, but if we educate them when they're in a good mental state, when, you know, you're feeling okay. So it's all about prevention. We don't wait. You know, the fire services, for example, in the UK, they do so much fire prevention stuff about design of houses, the design to prevent the fire from starting in the first place. And that's all we're saying about suicide prevention. Let's get it before people are having those suicidal thoughts. Because with over 1 million children waiting for, you know, mental health support on camps, we can't wait for the services to be there. We've got to help each other as a society.
Yeah, it's that being proactive rather than reactive. You know, that's always traditionally the way schools have worked. They always call people in afterwards, like PAPYRUS, when they've lost a pupil. But we need to be proactive with this.
And do you think are you seeing those changes in the curriculum? I know that the new curriculum was meant to be launched from autumn, wasn't it? Have you seen and engaged, and, you know, do you feel that that's shaping in a way that's positive?
Well, we've had some really interesting engagement with government. Walk, we spoke to so many suicide-bereaved parents who said, we only found out about PAPYRUS after we lost our young child.
Yeah.
It was only then we found out it's the biggest killer of young people in the country. Why didn't anybody tell us? It was that prompted us to contact the government, because we kind of accidentally developed a collective voice of all these people. Why didn't anybody tell us? This is the biggest risk to our young people. And so that prompted us to write to the government after we'd looked at the curriculum, which is, I've got to say, the curriculum now is way more interesting than certainly when we were at school. You do actually talk about mental health and mental and well-being and the benefits of exercise and all that kind of stuff. But conspicuous by this is the biggest risk. Surely we've got to talk about it. But then that ended up with lots of conversations with government, some better than others. But ultimately, we ended up sitting with Gillian Keegan, Secretary of State for Education, at the start of this summer, but critically with the team, the civil servants who are actually responsible for writing the RSHE curriculum, specifically that mental health bit. And it was fascinating talking to them, including Gillian, because they absolutely got it as parents, or some of them had been touched by suicide themselves. And it was the conversation ended up being about how do we do this, not whether we should do it or not.
Yeah.
And then from that, they asked us to put them in touch with all the experts, the real experts that we'd met along the way, whether they were from charities or academia. And through a series of conversations, I think everybody that got involved said, we've got to do this. Not doing nothing is not an option. So we've got to do something. So that's where we were in the summer, and we've had an early sight of the proposed curriculum, which looks very positive indeed. They did say they were going to publish it in October.
They did, didn't they? Not
I haven't seen it yet.
A few more days.
So we'll see. But the site what we've seen of it looked very positive indeed.
It's going out for public consultation, isn't it? That's what we've been told. So
Yeah.
when it does, we'll kind of promote that public consultation through all the people that 160,000 people that supported us on the. We can get back in contact with them through the petitions committee, but also on our social media. We'll spread that. We want the public to engage with this massively.
And let us help spread the word for you as well, because it's really, it's really, really key. It strikes me, I mean, again, I feel really privileged to be surrounded by young people all the time, but it actually strikes me they're better at talking about their mental health than we are or were. And that seems a massive step forward and a testament to the work that's being done already.
Yep, agree.
They absolutely are. That's what we want to kind of capture as well, because if we can get that suicide prevention in schools, to our 11, 12-year-olds now, then in 10 years' time, they'll be going into the workplace and they'll demand that suicide prevention in the workplace. And that will be a societal shift, absolute societal shift, because the young people, as they've done with many other campaigns, will quite rightly drag old fuddy-duddies into the 21st century and say we've got to address this, and we've got to have suicide safe spaces and be able to talk openly about suicide prevention. That's the key. The young people, we've heard so many horror stories where the young people are talking to each other about suicide prevention, but they're not willing to engage with the adults in their lives because it's a taboo subject. And so those young people are actively managing the risk around their peers, if you like. When one of their peers is struggling, the young people, one of the horror stories, were at age 12, were actively managing another 12-year-old who was in the process of trying to take their life. And the 12-year-old didn't know where to turn, so they were trying to cope with it amongst themselves. That's not how it should be. They should be able to come to us as adults and say, help, and at least signpost to the professionals.
We've seen suicide prevention taught in a couple of schools now, different age groups, year 7 and 15, 16-year-olds. And it was over a 6-week period, and we saw that the last, the last session of it. The amazing thing was teenagers are teenagers, aren't they? It was a Monday morning, and we watched Every Life Matters, wasn't it, who taught it, the wonderful charity. But we spoke to these kids afterwards, and you realise that, they all of a sudden became very eloquent, and they wanted to talk about it, as we're saying. But all of those kids now, it was very clear level of awareness they didn't have before. So, they can look out for themselves, maybe, their friends, their families, and they'll take these skills, I'm sure, into adulthood when they become parents. So it's a huge win-win situation here. I saw it also done in a school in the Wirral Grammar School for boys, a 6th form, but they were very eloquent. They were wonderful kids there, but they wanted to filter all this down, cascade all this down to younger kids and everything. It was wonderful to see.
Yeah, that kind of real.
And the thing behind all this is it's going back to the taboo and the stigma around suicide that adults, that us older folk cart around. It's something that we don't talk about. It's something that you don't think about. But whether you like it or not, our young people are talking about mental health issues, and they are talking about suicidal ideation, and we've got to allow them to talk in a safe and age-appropriate way and give them the skills to help themselves. Because if we don't do it, they're gonna pick up the phone. Oh, there's Sophie with a Megadeth t-shirt on, actually. They're gonna pick up the phones, and this is where they're gonna find out the information. So the choice of society is, where do we want them to find the information? Is it through this? or is it through a safe, age-appropriate, well-controlled series of lessons and discussions? And every time the conversations we've had, whoever we've spoken to, whether it's been, we spoke to loads of parents, obviously, we spoke to loads of teachers. I can't tell you the number of people we've spoken to within the Department for Education and right up to the Prime Minister. And when he asked the question, if this is the biggest risk to our young people, why aren't we talking about it? Nobody's said, the reason we're not talking about it is idiotic.
Yeah.
So we're going to keep asking the question.
Looking at the BBC News headlines this morning, one of the headlines is that there's a site that basically you can search it, you can easily search this site, and it will actively encourage suicide within young people. And they've been unable to shut this site down. And as Andy just said there, everything goes through the mobile phone with our young people now 24/7. So if we're not teaching them in school how to keep themselves safe, they will go straight onto their phone. And if they land on these sites are very dark, very evil, and the consequences is there. These costing hundreds, if not thousands of lives a year. The individuals who do this, I have no words for them. If they're influencing vulnerable people, it's absolutely foul. It's abhorrent.
Yeah. So getting the right message out through credible systems, through the education.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
And making sure the adults, whether it's, the teachers, whether it's the scout leaders, Girl Guides, those key influences, adults, face-to-face adults in those young people's lives is the key thing. And as I say, in 10 years' time, our young people will be adults that start to become parents, and it will be a societal shift. Absolutely. But the interesting thing was, we were talking about that education that we've seen in schools. The parents had to consent to that education, and not one parent said no.
No.
So the parents are crying out for their kids, because a parent's worst nightmare, isn't it, to lose a child?
Yeah.
Well,
so absolutely, anything you can do to support that education is so key.
And it strikes me, one of the things that you guys are doing, which is amazing, is educating us as well. So making it okay for for parents, for people who weren't in having that conversation, to be more open and fluent, to have that conversation with their children. So it's incredible. I wanted to ask you, I was really struck by the walking bit as well. So really struck by the conversations that happened while you're walking. I was really struck by the really brave individuals that came and joined you on your walks, for whom their devastation was very new and very raw, and really touched. Some of I'm sure many of us have watched Breakfast in tears over watching your journeys, but I was just thinking about, has walking helped with the talking? I know that's a really what else can we do that will help people, particularly of our generation, start talking, so it's okay and we can all have those conversations, or even actually a bit older than our generation, for whom these things are still quite challenging. What's the link with the walking? we
never saw this happening, especially on the first 21. We were just out to raise £3,000 each. I think almost we needed to do it for ourselves. We needed to be proactive, but we never in a million years saw what would happen. We were joined straight away, first few paces, by a bereaved mum, and she wanted to walk with us. She wanted to talk to us. And you're right, these are brave individuals. We're privileged to hear their stories, and we're not experts in any way. But I think what's different about myself, Andy and Tim, we're not stereotypical men, as in we don't talk. You can't shut us up. Obviously, you're learning this now, aren't you, Paula? But as soon as we started walking, and you're right, people wanted to come out and talk, but many people were processing their grief that sometimes was very recent, literally weeks. And some people were processing grief that went back decades. Yeah. And it's so important to be able to talk all aspects, to process the grief, You know, they say 135 people are affected by one suicide. I know that it was far more with Beth, but they were all processing the grief. They needed to talk as part of going on, but also this talking as well enabled people to go home and talk to their loved ones who are maybe struggling and be able to have these conversations without embarrassment, without anything else that goes with it. So yeah, but walking and talking, oh wow. You know, people often ask, didn't they, sort of, how did myself, Andy and Tim get on? We didn't really talk to each other. We talked to other people, you know, who joined it, because they tended to go from one to the other, but it was extremely powerful.
And the process of walking is really quite interesting. So we the walk from our point of view when we set off, as Mike said, it was a walk to raise money, so a classic charity walk. But because of the people we met along the way and the subject and the reason why we were walking prompted lots of conversation. But that process of walking alongside people doesn't create a massive safe space where it allows people to talk very openly, because you're not looking at it's not like this kind of conversation where we're looking at each other, or when you're sitting across a desk or in a room, because you don't look at the person you're talking to. You're kind of talking into the world, and people just open up. So it's very it was a real privilege, as Mike was saying, to accidentally have created this space that allowed people to share all kinds of stuff with us. And invariably at the end of the conversations, or at the end when people left us, there were different people after that time spent with us, and it wasn't because anything particular that we'd done, other than share time and a bit of kindness with them, I suppose. Very powerful stuff.
And there was I'm thinking several times there were people there that we met on the second walk that when we met them on the first walk, they were not in a good place, and we chatted to them. We didn't do anything more than chatting to them. And then they came and met us on the second walk, and some of them looked after us, accommodated us. Others told us what they've been doing, and running half marathons and marathons. And absolutely, I think that when you lose someone to suicide, you feel so isolated. You feel like you're the only person in the world that's lost a loved one to suicide. And the three of us are just quite lucky that we, you know, accidentally through our surviving kids connected with each other, and were able to channel, you know, have that peer support. And peer support is, for me, and I know for the other two, is massively important, because you're just with people that get it. They absolutely, totally understand the level of grief and despair that you've been in, and then try and get something positive out of it. And that was it for us. That was so, well, for me, I know for the other two as well, that was so incredibly powerful to see these people open up, sometimes the first time, as Mike said, in decades, and just explain about what their life had been and what their loved one had been through for whatever reason, with no judgment at all. And then by the end of it, you know, we'd be in tears. The three of us would be in tears talking to whoever it was that was walking with us. But a couple of hours later, we'd be in howls of laughter, you know. So how you can turn that absolute despair into something positive. And that's just the power of being outside and walking.
Yeah, I love it. And being able to talk about your loved ones, that's the real key, isn't it?
Yeah.
We don't have loads of time left. I wondered if you could each just leave us with a few lasting thoughts around what we can do and what we can keep doing and carry with us.
Actually,
I'd say.
I was going to start with the words of our great guru, Alan Hinks.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, Alan Hinks is a mountaineer and kind of professional Yorkshireman, very rough, and is the only Briton to have climbed all 14 8,000-meter peaks, and I've known him for years. These two had the pleasure of meeting him on the first walk and realised what a weird bloke he is. A narcissist, I think he described himself as.
Is he listening?
Well, I'll send him it. Who knows what I think of him? Because underneath Alan, this weird exterior, is an unbelievably kind person, kind and thoughtful person. his sister tried to take her own life, and that has had a big impact on the way he thinks about people. And one of the things he said to us was, you don't know what's going on in other people's minds. You just don't. We can't know what's going on in other people's heads. So just be kind. Which, coming out of his mouth, is like, you what?
Yeah.
But Hink says, be kind. So that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Fits perfectly, doesn't it?
I would say the one thing that I wish I'd known beforehand is the fact there's suicide prevention charities out there, PAPYRUS being one of them. There's other brilliant charities out there as well. And the fact that PAPYRUS has got a helpline, Hopeline 24/7, it's open 24 hours a day, that you can call about if you're concerned about a loved one, if you're concerned about a friend, and get that advice. And the PAPYRUS website offers loads of advice. So I just, it's a plea really for people to become familiar with what help is out there. And PAPYRUS is great because it's a starting point. It's the tip, it's the very tip. It will try and stop you taking your life, but then it will then look at the reason for why you're in there, whether it be debt, whether it be relationship problems, drug and alcohol abuse, whatever it is. And that, they'll try and signpost you into the specialist areas to get that support. But they're a wonderful bunch of people. I can't believe the staff that I've met there.
Yeah.
When I first suicide prevention advisors, experts, I thought they'd be a really kind of sad bunch of people, and they are just a wonderful bunch of people that throw their all into trying to save other people's lives. They're brilliant.
I concur.
Yeah.
I concur.
What I would say, I'd put a plea out for parents to basically take suicide awareness or suicide prevention courses. I know my family was the last family in the world that thought we'd ever lose a child to suicide. It was absolutely unthinkable. But it's all, there's nothing more precious in your kids. But some of the most powerful stories we heard were from those who had been in crisis, who had been struggling. Many cases had tried to take their own lives, but now they're living lives they want to. Not every day is rosy, but use them as example. And I put a plea out to young people listening to this as well. Give yourself a chance. Give yourself those second chances, as many as it takes, because often things will change and change for the better.
Oh, those feel like really, really powerful words, and some, joy and hope to finish on. Thank you so very, very much. Honestly, it's been a total joy to talk to you.